Hello and welcome to the first CFJ Spotlight of 2022. It's been a while since we met online like this, but quite a lot has been happening in the CFJ office to see how we can make these video events even more meaningful. They were very popular last year, and our plans for this year include quite a number of changes. So in a few moments, I'm going to be talking to David Stridham, because each month on CFJ Spotlight, we want to highlight some of the important things that are coming up in the magazine the following month. And you'll notice already that our CFJ Spotlight has moved towards the end of a month so that you won't have too long to wait to actually read the articles that you'll hear about when I chat with David. And then we're going to have, as usual, a feature about something significant in the industry. But some of those things might surprise you. There are certainly some issues that the flooring industry hasn't been aware of. And we hope that we can bring some of those to life, as well as keeping you up to date with products and fitting information and so on. So what I'd like to do right at the start of this, our first CFJ Spotlight for 2022, is actually see if I can bring David Stridham, the editor of Contract Flooring Journal, onto the screen to join me. And we're going to have a chat about what's coming up in the March issue of the magazine. Are you there, David?
Hi, Richard. Can you see me?
Hi, I can see you fine. How are you doing?
Very well. How are you keeping?
Yeah, not so bad, thank you. It's been quite a while since we had a CFJ Spotlight. And last year we were calling it the Digital Workshop. But we've had a few issues of the magazine since then. And I've noticed quite a number of features that have come through. What have we got coming up in our March issue that we should particularly look out for?
Good to see you again, Richard. There's a couple of things that are coming. The two biggest things that are really featuring in the March edition are our training section and a response to a column by Brian King, which ran in our January edition about mental health. But if we focus on the training first, that entails an exclusive trip that I took up to F-Ball headquarters in Cheddleton in Staffordshire. To sit in on one of their training courses in their training centre, which is a very impressive facility on the grounds of the F-Ball estate, and that takes up a good deal of coverage in the March edition, because it was very enlightening for me to actually sit with these guys, contractors, see what they were doing, see what they were learning, and actually I got to interview all of them, which was a great experience to hear what had brought them to the F-Ball centre.
So had you actually gone up to do the training course, David?
The intention was that I would do the training course, yes. But actually, the way it worked out was I sat in on bits of it and got so carried away talking to these guys and interested in their stories and where they were coming from and how far many of them had travelled. I mean, we had guys from Carlisle, you had guys from Cornwall, from every part of the country. And as I say, managed to interview all of them. So I can't actually confess to having done any physical work, Richard, but I can tell you I learned a lot anyway.
Well, I thought for a moment we might be making a fitter out of you after all, but at least you've seen how it's done. Now, those courses are very popular, not just with F-Ball, but with a lot of the other compound and product manufacturers do run these training courses. How well did it go down with the people that you were speaking to?
It was pretty unanimous in terms of how positive they felt. What I really enjoyed about this course and speaking to them about the course was the fact that they'd come from wherever they'd come from in the country, and they'd come to an F-Ball centre, but F-Ball hadn't necessarily been pushed on them to the extent that it was all about F-Ball. It was actually about the floor laying. It was about the adhesives. It was about the skills that go into floor laying, various flooring formats. And this particular course was on LVT as well. So I was pretty impressed by that. And the guys were giving a lot of positive feedback. So all of them were obviously very pleased to be on the course. They felt that it was worth the time they were taking away from their their respective bases. And I think that really says something, because, as you know, this period after lockdown has been incredibly busy for contractors and flooring companies. And for them to actually let their guys go for 2-3 days, and if you include travel in that, maybe even more time away from where they're much needed on site, to go to these courses, tells you how much valuable time they gave up. But I think they really got it back in terms of what they got from F-Ball.
So your impression was that investment in terms of time would pay off because of the improved quality of work, and maybe they learned ways to do things more quickly.
Very much so. Yes, very much so. The nice thing about the course as well was you had some theory, you had some practical, and F-Ball as well threw in a tour for the guys. So they went around the F-Ball facility. They got to see the factory, how everything is made in the factory and manufactured. They got to see the sustainability, waste recycling and management side of things on the F-Ball site. So it's not simply a course the way we would have understood it historically, where you just pitch up at a classroom and get told what's going on. It's all inclusive in terms of every aspect of flooring manufacturing.
That's good. I'm certainly going to look out for that article, and I'm sure you'll have put in there, if anybody's interested in following up on that with F-Ball, all their contact details and information will be there. So that's great. And incidentally, as we're running today's program, if any of you who are tuning in want to ask questions about this, although our panel isn't made up of people from F-Ball or any of the product manufacturers today, nevertheless, if you ping an answer in the question box, then if we can't answer it in the questions and answers, we'll make sure we get an answer to you as soon as we can after the program goes out. So, okay, well, you spoke earlier, David, about an interview with Brian King. Now, I remember Brian wrote a very, I think, moving article is the way to put it, really, back in the January issue. So is this a follow-up now to what he wrote there?
Well, this is what you'll see in the March edition is the response that we've received to Brian's article. And I just want to comment very briefly on what you said about very moving. I have to tell you, Richard, been in the journalism trade for more than 30 years. And I remember the evening I was subbing that article. I'd received the article from Brian and I was processing it in order to put it in the January edition. And I was so moved by what he'd written in terms of his life experiences, in terms of his friends, in terms of their mental health, that I actually picked up my phone and texted him and said, wow, Brian, this article is quite incredible. He has that ability, Brian. He's written columns for us before about floor layers struggling with alcohol abuse, about floor layers struggling with stress and heart pressures. And he has that ability to really get to the core of what floor layers are feeling and what they're going through in terms of their jobs, which isn't often spoken about. And so this column was really hard hitting. I knew it was going to make an impression, but I had no idea that it was going to have such an impression. Now, I've been editor for 6 years of CFJ. I have never seen a response, never seen so many respondents and such a heartfelt response to a column that we've run in the magazine. So this really surprised me in a good way. And it opened my eyes as well, because I hadn't actually realized how important mental health was to floor layers. I never thought it was something that they'd be interested in talking about or that they were interested in. And it's just, it's quite incredible, the response that we've had to this.
I have to say, David, I'm not surprised. The thing is that of all the people who read Contract Flooring Journal or who tune into Digital Spotlight, they come from lots of different aspects of the industry. And so some people may be interested only in a certain kind of product or only interested in sales rather than installation. But mental health is an issue that affects everybody. And I think in the industry, we've been more obsessed with our banter and trying to make out what big cheeses we all are. And what Brian said really struck to the heart of the fact that there are lots of problems that go unnoticed. And sometimes we may not even recognize that ourselves. So I'm glad that's coming up again in the March issue. But actually, because of the feedback from that article, what I've already done is spend a bit of time talking to Brian. And I'm going to take you over now to an interview that I held with Brian just a week or so ago to talk about the things that came up in his article. So, David, thanks for your time. I'll look forward to seeing you next month. And we'll pop over now and I'll have a chat with Brian before we go into our chat room and our Q&As. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Not so bad, Richard.
You had a good day today? What have you been up to?
I've been on carpet today, fitting a big through lounge for an old lady. So we had to uplift all the carpets, move all the furniture. So it's been a tough day, to be honest.
Okay, well, thanks for taking the time out to chat to me. I wanted to pick up with you because this article that you wrote for the January issue of CFJ seems to have really sparked off a lot of interest. Now, I know that in the CFJ office, they've had a lot of feedback. Has there been any feedback direct to you?
Lots. How it started was I was at FITA, the Flooring Industry Training Association, and I was just in the canteen making myself a cup of tea, and I heard two people talking about a colleague they know, a mutual friend, and they was really surprised that this colleague was suffering from mental health and depression and was on medication. And I overheard one of them said that there's no help in the flooring industry or nowhere to go to for mental health. So I made me a cup of tea, went about business, and I started to think about it that night. So I thought, I'll have a look into this, see if there is anything in the workplace. And I couldn't find anything at all. So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna write an article about this. And if it helps one person, it's been worthwhile. But the response I got was overwhelming. Over the period of a few days after it came out, I just got message after message. People have been suffering. It just spiraled from there, really, Richard.
I know that there's been a lot of talk in the news media over the last couple of years because of the effects of lockdown about, well, there's certainly an increased awareness of mental health issues. Now, from your point of view, Brian, you've worked in the trade for a long time. Do you think that what's coming out now is a new problem, or is this something that's just been hidden for a long time and people are afraid to talk about it and share about it?
I think we like floor lays. It's mainly male driven. So and like the old school fitters, they won't talk about problems. Like females, they talk to each other about the problems openly, but males tend to bottle it in. And if they do talk about problems like that, it's seen as like a weakness. But I think as time's gone on, people are talking and opening up more about it. That's my thoughts on it. And also as well, like myself, a lot of floor layers work on their own, so they have time to think all day and dwell on problems. So I don't think that helps.
No, I certainly agree with you there. Now, in terms of the industry, I mean, are we aware of any individual companies or organizations that are there that we can call on to help?
After looking into it, the only manufacturer that do offer support for mental health is Bostik. I think they have trained people within Bostik, the company, they can turn to and get help from. But other than that, I couldn't find anything else.
Oh, well, that's interesting, because a lot of companies recognize the need for first aid. And in fact, they will have people trained in first aid. I myself am first aid trained, as are you, I know, because all fitter instructors have to be. But I've also done a training course in mental health first aid, which St. John Ambulance offer. And maybe there are companies that are tuned in to us today who could send some of their first aiders on the mental health courses, because that certainly opens your eyes not only to what the problems might be, but actually how you can help with that in a non-threatening, non-critical way. And I guess one of the things people are afraid of is if they open up about this, particularly, I'm sure you find in a lot of fitting atmospheres, there's a lot of banter and there's a lot of putting people down, which is not the best atmosphere in which to share issues like this. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. On site with a bunch of blokes, if somebody turns around and says, "Oh, I'm struggling, I'm a bit depressed," it's a sign of weakness, really. A lot of people think, "Oh, you're weak," but no. Yeah, I think floor layers, well, not particularly just floor layers, men in general should open up and turn to somebody to speak to, or have somebody they can turn to and speak to.
That's great. Well, we're going to be talking in a few minutes when this goes out live. Obviously, we're pre-recording this interview, but when this goes out, we'll be moving on to actually a live session with a couple of people involved in this field who I think will be able to offer some tools and help to people in the trade. But I'm aware, Brian, that for you, David, the editor, has asked you to make some more contributions. I understand you're going to be writing more on this subject over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I've got quite a bit to write about, to be honest, Richard. My next couple is an NICF council member. He came forward after he saw my article. He was a drug addict and an alcoholic, and all the time he had those addictions. He was floor laying, and then he started suffering from depression and mental health. It's quite a moving story. So I think I'm going to do that over a couple of articles. And then there's an NICF member what was in the army, and a couple of his friends have committed suicide because they were suffering from PTSD. So I'm going to have a catch up with him. And there's a couple more floor layers what's come forward that they've been struggling and on medication for quite a few years. So yeah, over the next few months I'll be pursuing it a bit more.
That's really good, Brian. I'm delighted to hear that, and thank you for starting the ball rolling with this issue. And I'm sure there are lots of people who are going to be following this with interest. And no doubt that through the magazine, if anybody wants to get in touch with you about issues that you might be able to cover and help with, I'm sure you'd be interested to hear from them.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's great. Well, look, Brian, thanks for your time. And those of you who've tuned in today, please follow Brian's articles in the magazine. But also now we're going to go over to our chat room where live I'm going to be talking to a couple of people. I've got their names here. Becky Verity and James Garbett are going to be in the chat room waiting for me so that we can talk further about this very important subject. But for now, Brian, thanks very much for being here. And for everybody watching,
pleasure, Richard.
Thanks. For everybody watching, if you can now move from the main stage into the chat room, you'll find the button to click on the left-hand side of your screen. I'll see you there in the chat room as soon as you make it to join us. See you soon. For those of you just joining us, thanks for coming over. And I'd like to introduce you to James Garbett, who's with me just now. James is, I think I saw your title was marketing executive.
Yeah, that's the one.
For a charity called Mates in Mind that's been working with the construction industry for some years now. Sadly, the other person who was going to join us hasn't been able to make it today. So, James, we're going to focus on the work that your organization does and really try and relate it to our business as flooring contractors, floor layers, manufacturers, retailers, whatever aspect of our industry we may be in. Just Can you give us an overview of Mates in Mind? It's not a charity I'd heard of until I was preparing for this session today.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mates in Mind is actually still quite a new charity. We've been established now for 5 years. And we came about when sort of the construction leaders in the industry sort of realized that there was a massive problem with mental health within the construction industry. Obviously, the stats are actually quite shocking and very harrowing, with sort of 2 construction workers unfortunately taking their own lives every day, and suicide being unfortunately more of a risk to construction workers than falls. So they put together this charity as part of the British Safety Council, really to be dedicated to trying to fix this issue and working with organizations, big and small, to really sort of help doing this. And really the number one way to do that is to eliminate the stigma. Sort of as Brian was saying, sort of these construction industry and carpet industry as well, sort of predominantly they're male, and sort of us males aren't very good about talking about our feelings and talk about how we're feeling, as we do see it as a sign of weakness. So really where we're working is with these organizations to start the conversations. So there doesn't feel like there's a stigma in saying, I need support, I need help.
And so are you already working with any flooring companies? I mean, I don't want you to breach any confidences, or is it mainly the construction industry in general so far?
Yes, we've got a lot of supporters in the flooring industry, not so much really at this current time, but generally we focus on construction as an industry. But we're working with also sort of industries such as transport and logistics as well. Sort of as we've expanded, because we've realized that it's not just, while construction was where we've set up to sort of focus on, there are so many other industries that also have this problem too.
But I think there are lots of similarities. I mean, in the flooring trade, we consider ourselves to be in the construction industry anyway.
Yes,
but there's also a lot of similarities in the way we work with the companies that you deal with. Now, have you done any research into how big the problem is, and the issues that arise?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, we've just completed our study with about 300 people interviewing construction workers from SMEs and sole traders with the IAS and funded by a grant from BNCE. And sort of what we did was interview 300 people about the way they were feeling and sort of if they felt supported, where sort of their struggles and worries were coming from. And sort of while we have the preliminary results, we're still studying interviews, but the results already were quite sort of shocking. We sort of said that a third of construction workers suffer with elevated levels of anxiety each day. And this isn't just like I feel quite worried. This is consistent feelings of very much being on edge, not being able to concentrate, not very much being able to focus. And further to that, sort of 44% worrying that their workload is too high. And sort of one of the real sort of shocking statistics was that over 2/3 of construction workers believe there's a stigma surrounding mental health, which stops them from talking about it. And that's one of the number one ways that sort of we're trying to intervene, is just by starting those conversations.
So if I understood the figures correctly, what you're saying is about 1 in 3 really struggle in this area, and 2 in 3 think that there's a stigma attached to it. So there's a very small fraction of people who would be willing to open up, would be willing to call for help, or would be sensitive to what's going on with the people working around them. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of one of the other kind of statistics that is somewhat shocking is that roughly the amount of people who would go to their GP to get counselling, and the people who then rely on sort of non-prescription drugs is around the same as a percentage, which is a really worrying statistic. And ultimately, sort of the main thing that really is important is that conversations are had. There is, I think, sort of I've spoken to a lot of people within the industry, and sort of they've said that when they've been struggling, the thing that has helped them out surprisingly was someone coming in just being like, are you okay? And of course they said the standard like, yeah, I'm fine. And then another person sort of then going a bit further and they're saying, but how are you really? And that's just been important, and creating those cultures where it's okay to talk about mental health and where employers totally understand it. There's not a need to hide it from employers, which there still very much is. It's just going to be, if we can continue to try and break down that stigma, it's going to be so much better for workplace well-being, for productivity, and everyone else is just going to be, the workers will be happier and more safe as a result.
But whenever anybody says, "Are you okay?" you say, "Fine." That's the standard response, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. I mean, I'm guilty of doing it myself. And I think sort of the tendency is if you think someone could be struggling and sort of you've noticed that maybe they're detaching a little bit more, they maybe not be engaging in conversation a bit more. They don't quite see it themselves. That second, "how are you?" is so critically important. You might think, oh, they said they're fine, they're absolutely okay, because that's just what we're conditioned to say. But that second, "how are you?" is so important, and you'll be surprised just by saying that how many people then go, "Actually, you know, I would like to sort of talk to you about this." And it doesn't have to be a formal sit down discussion. It could be literally sort of a casual conversation, but just knowing someone is there and that someone is ready to listen and ready to support is so important.
Do you think there could be an issue where somebody who is really trying to remain anonymous could feel a little bit got at if you started asking more questions?
Yeah, definitely. And it is important to sort of respect their boundaries. Sometimes people don't want to talk about it right now, but having the ability for someone to know that they're there and that they are ready to speak, if they so need to, is also going to be really helpful. I mean, that's one of the sort of the main things. You can't force people to open up, but the idea of knowing that someone is there to listen if you're ready to is going to be really helpful to a person who's struggling.
Yeah, I think flagging up that you're available, but you're not putting any further pressure on, that sounds really helpful. Now, when I was talking to Brian in that interview that we recorded a week or so ago, Brian had talked about realizing there really weren't any resources directly aimed at the flooring trade, but obviously your organization has been working for about 5 years, so this is pre-pandemic. You were dealing with these kind of issues long before the issues that the pandemic has added to the burden. What kind of resources do you have that flooring companies could make use of?
Yeah, so there's quite a few. So obviously, as a sort of industry or as a supporters, what we do is sort of people who sign up and ask to get involved. We have an annual assessment, and we have a course which is basically all about sort of talk to employees about the importance of starting a conversation regarding mental health, as well as sort of one of the main things we do is resources, because we've been conditioned to have the stigma for so long that breaking it down is not going to be easy. So we have sort of courses that we offer. We have education sort of resources as well. For example, one of the things that has been downloaded the most on our website is a Spot the Signs infographic, which anyone can download. Anyone can go onto our website and find it. And it's just a very simple breakdown of sort of how someone could be struggling. It's not, of course, all the signs, but it's some of the real major ones. So that has been really important. And I've had feedback myself of people sort of saying, oh, this has been so good. We've put this right up in our office. And so people just got it in the back of their minds. And they're constantly thinking, oh, that's happened to this person today. I'm just going to go check on them and see if they're okay. And also for employers as well. It's not just employees in the culture, it's employers making sure they can create that positive environment where people are able to talk. So obviously one of the things about sort of construction and carpentry, and my dad's worked in the carpet industry for, 30 odd years. And I've noticed it with him is that there is a lot of anxieties about sort of, where is it going to come from, sort of the next paycheck, got to support families. So it's incredibly sort of high pressure atmospheres, and just making sure to say, if you're not feeling okay, that's okay to say so.
That's great. Now, I don't know if you noticed that on the side of the screen, there's a Q&A box, and there are some questions coming in now. Now, I know that Mates in Mind, primarily you're working with businesses rather than individuals, but I also know that you have a lot of awareness yourself of the other organizations working in the same space, but perhaps with a slightly different emphasis. So the first question here, if someone in the flooring industry needs help, how can they get help? Can you give us some pointers there?
Yeah, of course. So sort of Mates in Mind, we work more with employers, but of course we have our friends over at the Lighthouse Club who have a support line, and they're very much about individual support and how they can help. So I would sort of, if anyone was ever struggling in that way, I would suggest they would go over to the Lighthouse Club website. The telephone number is on the website, and give them a call, because they'll really be able to help with that sort of direct, fast, quick support.
Yeah, and of course, perhaps in a more dire situation, there are organisations like the Samaritans and
yes, of course,
the ones that people are aware of. Within a company, who might they be able to get some help from?
Oh, so obviously HR is obviously important, but that's obviously for bigger companies. Not everyone has sort of the luxury of being able to have a HR department. I've known in previous jobs in myself, I'm not in the construction industry, but not having HR can be sort of difficult. Within sort of a large company, if that's not applicable, then line managers are always something that sort of should be a person that you're able to talk to about. Because sort of employers do actually have a legal requirement to assess sort of stress within their employees and make sort of proactive decisions to avoid it. So speaking to line managers could be very helpful in that regard.
Okay, and if the line manager is perhaps part of the cause of the problem?
Oh, well, that's a difficult question. Then sort of, I think it's very important to talk. If you feel like you can't go higher up, then speaking to another colleague who may be in the same position would be very important. And again, if you're a sole trader, then while obviously you can talk to families and they could be helpful, but if you feel that it's a particularly tricky position, going to your GP and you're feeling those feelings of anxiety is sort of where I would signpost next.
Okay, and it's not an easy thing to do if you're in those situations, but let's think now, somebody's asked, do you have a helpline people can call? I guess that would be where we would say, go to the Lighthouse Club if it's to do with an individual circumstance. But the next question is, can a company join Mates in Mind to offer support to their fitters?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. And that's something that we would certainly encourage. Sort of becoming a supporter at Mates in Mind is very easy. If you go to the contact us page, you can request a call back and one of our support managers will be in contact. And I think what we're very keen to sort of show is that we know it's not a one size fits all approach, and that sort of we understand that, you know, every organization is going to have a different culture, it's going to have different needs. So we basically work with whatever company size it is and whatever objectives they are to make sure that they are feeling that they can change the mental health attitudes in their workplace and eliminate the stigma. So it's a really personalized approach. So yeah, absolutely.
That's great, James. Really appreciate your input here. And for those of you who are tuning in, don't forget, Brian is going to be writing more on this subject. And I've no doubt that David, who you met earlier, the editor, is going to be in touch with you, James, to see if we can get some more input from you. Because this is such a serious issue. And the more we can learn to listen, and the more we can learn to help people understand that they're not on their own and isolated, the better it will be. So, James, I really appreciate your help today. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure, Richard. Thank you for having me.
Well, and to those of you who are tuned in, thanks for watching today. Look out for news of our next event. And over the coming months, we are going to be looking at some other issues, not necessarily directly related to mental health, but how about thinking about knees, which for floor layers is quite a significant issue. So watch this space, and I hope that you'll join us again the next time we have our CFJ Spotlight. But thank you for joining us today. James, you and I, if we log out, and then everybody else will do the same. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Richard.